Started?
Yep. When you're ready, it's all yours.
Awesome. Hope everybody's doing well during this COVID situation we got going on. I know a lot of people's training has been kind of adjusted, and we've not been any different at the University of Dayton. So in the meantime, kind of go through how we approach incoming student athletes. It doesn't matter what sport. Myself, I work with, I'm the assistant for our football strength and conditioning. But I have women's soccer, softball, men's and women's golf, rowing. I work with the cheer as well. And then my boss has basically everybody else. And between the two of us, we don't handle men's basketball or women's basketball. But the rest of the sports, between the two of us, we've got it divvied up, and we kind of approach programming for each sport along the same lines. Obviously, each sport has its differences, but being able to go in and kind of have the same base and the same principles for each sport really helps to create the best athletes that we can kind of create. And the other thing too is with this presentation, this is kind of how we approach. It really doesn't matter if it's an incoming athlete from high school or if they're coming from a different university. We kind of approach it all the same way. The real basis for what we do is around improving biomechanics. So helping our athletes to just move better, create force better. That's typically at our level what the type of athletes we're dealing with. So as we get into here, just with any presentation, just be a good professional with stuff. Don't take this new information, go ahead and start using it with your athletes right away. Vet it yourself, make sure you know what's being used and what you're going to get out of stuff, what are some potential injury, that kind of stuff, so that you can use it with your clientele and your population appropriately. So keep that in mind too before I get into this slide here. It's just do any presentation. Coach Raymond was saying during his presentation, he's working with guys at it's different animal with athletes. There's two or high school. Just know that each coach you're seeing, while you might not agree with what they're doing, there's probably a well thought out rationale why they're doing what they're doing, and it might be at times working with the sport coach allows you to do within different institutional guidelines with what you're allowed to do. I know some places have a little bit stricter guidelines as it dealing with sports med than others. So as you go through these different educational seminars.
Coach Phillips.
So for us, yes, sir.
Sorry to interrupt. Just so you're aware, occasionally you're breaking up a little bit as you're speaking. Just so you're aware if that happens, and we can't hear you, and if you go a long period of time, then I'll let you know. And if you don't mind repeating some of the stuff, that'd be awesome.
Sounds good. So our incoming athletes in general. Now this isn't for every single athlete, but for the most part, these are some things you want to see across all of them. This I'm sure is what everybody else is seeing across their incoming athletes as well. Everybody's stages getting on phones and sitting a lot more just inside some posture. So the other stuff we'll see is lack of coordination. Now, it's not that they're not coordinated for their sport. We're talking about lack of coordination. We're talking about in the whole.
Yeah, it's breaking up pretty good right now.
All right, I'm not sure how to
right now it's good.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So our athletes, though, they might be uncoordinated, not necessarily their sport. They were recruited that deals with athleticism as a whole. A lot of our athletes have specialized, especially not necessarily football, but in some of our other sports. Soccer, last thing they played have been in maybe. That's some stuff that we're seeing. So they're lacking flexibility just from doing stuff that we used to do back in the 80s and 90s, playing outside, and some of those it's changed society.
Coach,
not necessarily. Does it keep Coach, cutting in and out?
Yeah, we have a recommendation here. It says sometimes it helps if the speakers turn off video and just shares the screen.
Okay, we'll try that. All right, we'll give it a go. So as far as unexplosive goes, that's just at our level, Division I. More so with our football program, we're kind of along the same lines as a Division III. We are non-scholarship. So some of our athletes might come in not quite as explosive as some of the other athletes at Division I level. So, it's all relative as well. So just trying to help get them more explosive. A lot of it has to do, though, with their biomechanics, along with those other bullet point at the bottom there, the imbalanced musculature. It all has to do with biomechanics. If they don't do exercises correctly, then it doesn't carry over. So what we are attempting to do is have overall athleticism. Trying to get those balanced as possible while understanding that some of those balances make them who they are. And then a lot of when we're in the weight room, we don't really do a ton of movements that are partial range of motion. A lot of our stuff is done range of motion to help us to mobilize. You can see I've got some pictures. I got some videos. I've got pictures of some of the lunges, squats, I'm sure some squats, but to help mobilize those hips and get stuff nice and loose so that when they're playing, they're good to go. These are two big thrusts in general. It's the acronym KISS. If you don't know what it stands for, keep it simple, stupid. So we are not trying to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of people that are very, very smart and intelligent that have developed processes that are work really, really well and are very effective. There's no for each of the different sports and apply gas with it. A lot easier to if you have this beautifully thought out, very complicated plan and there's so we try to use it as much as possible. Now, instead, we are doing what is necessary for them to perform at the level we're asking them to perform. But within our coaching, our cues, we don't get overly technical. Try to keep it simple, try to keep it able to work for everybody, right? Because you got to keep in mind that these student athletes, they want to play their sport. They're not necessarily here to lift weights. So we try to keep that in mind with everything that we do. And then the other principle is the SAID principle. I think most people would know that one, specific adaptation to impose demand. So with that, just keeping in mind, we don't necessarily work out, and that's kind of a pet peeve of ours. When people call the training sessions workouts, because anybody can work out. But what we do is hopefully pragmatic in its approach and progressionary and trying to get them to a specific type of whatever it is for their sport, trying to get them where they need to be. So we're not trying to waste workouts. So we're trying to keep everything along line and progress from everything. So, and this all starts for us in the, so I don't know if this video will be slow or not. We'll give it a go. I think like most people nowadays, we don't just look at the warm up and just, okay, here you go start doing some stuff. We look at this as running mechanics. Okay, this is another chance to work on running well. Every sport deals with some sort of running. So this is just kind of a little bit of the mechanic part of what we do. Within that, we will do these same movements on maybe a set of stairs or through a ladder. We don't necessarily use the ladder in terms of trying to get a lot of foot touches and do some of the videos you'll see on YouTube, but we'll use the ladder in order to, okay, we're going to do high knees through the ladder. That just ensures us that we're going to get this many reps of high knees, because we all know that athletes, a lot of times you say do 10 yards of high knees and they shortchange it. So this just helps us to continue along the lines of making sure that we're getting the reps in that we need. The biggest thing we're coaching them up on here is posture, staying nice and tall with what we're doing, not bending over at the hips, staying tall through movements. Okay, it's a big theme for everything that we do. It doesn't matter whether it's in a warm-up setting, in the weight room, or doing any sort of running activities, agilities, plyometrics, postures, everything. Okay, if you have bad posture, you cannot produce force the same as somebody that has better posture. Within this, what we do with the stairs, jump rope and ladder, and we have these mini pile boxes that are about 8 inches high. So we'll do like a quick little low intensity plyo, tie it in with and then for 10 yards, and then when they walk back to their box, they'll do some sort of dynamic stretch, so like a walking hamstring stretch, a walking quad stretch. So it all starts with one for us. It takes about 5 to 10 minutes, give or take. So we them
You're breaking up pretty good.
Slightly. Yeah. Well, maybe I'll just go through and show all the videos. People can kind of see that. But yeah, so the throughout what we're doing. In the weight room wise, again, big theme, posture, full range of motion. And then I'm going to kind of let these videos run on some of our progressions. Everybody on this call with what they might do. We do utilize the Olympic lifts pretty frequently, but it also depends on the sport and how much other plyometrics, that kind of stuff we're doing. But I'll let this run. Clean and snatch progressions. The biggest thing that we're coaching up here is not them as Olympic lifters, but them as athletes. So posture on everything, whether it's a snatch on the right side of the video or clean on the left side. The biggest difference obviously is your hand placement and then where the bar is going to finish. But within those movements right there, we're getting a good power angle through the hips, through the knees, which is basically our athletic position. Good triple extension. Then we catch a lot with our athletes to get that triple flexion, which is always going to precede any sort of triple extension in athletic sense. So within this, we're not sitting here trying to go crazy with this. Okay, we're trying to approach the stuff violently. We'll start with the pull, and we'll build up the high pull, and then finally have them catch as the semester goes on. And then throughout the year, we use different derivatives as it fits within that year. Some of the sports will catch throughout the year. Some of the sports will stay with the pulls or the high pulls. It just kind of depends on where we are. But the biggest thing we're getting out of it is great posture, great mechanics through the movement. Okay, initiating it out from our feet up through our hips and not using our violent upper body movement to start your lower half. So that's kind of those movements. And so as we're going through here, obviously, posture looks like, just like anything else, you're coaching them up on what the poor posture looks like. Now, I'm in these pictures over exaggerating some of the stuff we'll see in pictures 1 and picture 2, but picture 3 we'll see a lot of times. And those are our athletes that are trying to use their knees to initiate all of their movement versus trying to use their hips. So that's a big cue that we'll see. And so we just try to get them to be more loaded through their hips. So with sports like baseball and softball, now we tie that into the sport. Okay, this is you getting in the batter's box. If you get in the batter's box and you push your knees forward, you're not going to be able to hit crap. But if you sit your hips back and you get loaded in your hips, now when you turn on that inside pitch, you're going to have a lot more behind it, make it a little hotter to handle for third baseman. Or if you're throwing the ball, you don't want to have your knees out in front of the toes. You want to get stuff loaded through your hips where your engine is. So again, I've over-exaggerated some of these postural issues, but we do see that to an extent. So we got to coach them up on, especially the first time in the weight room. Soccer players maybe have never done anything like this. So really trying to harp on them on this. Our football players usually have some sort of background, and so they are able to kind of get going a little bit quicker than some of our other sports. This is another big one too with our pull. We don't like the bar going out away from the body. We want everything generated in a vertical sense. Again, coming back to the key of posture, this is bad posture. Again, probably over exaggerating how far the bar goes out. But this is starting to get into, if we were going to catch the bar, a bad bar path. So we want everything going nice and vertical, whether it's the clean or it's the snatch. Another thing too is you'll see with high pulls, not necessarily pulling with the elbows. You'll see them pulling with their hands, which takes their force generation from being from the hips, and they're relying more on the upper body. So what we're trying to do is get them to go hip fire, then upper body. We don't get any more complicated than that. We try to keep it pretty simple so that we can get the best results possible. Obviously on catch, I think we've all seen different sorts of issues with the catch. Picture 2 is what I talked about, the bar path going too far out away from the body. So we want them pulling that bar tight to the body, catching with elbows up, not elbows down, and then heels flat on the floor, not leaning forward onto the balls of the feet like in picture 3, or in picture 1, not having our feet be really spread out to the side. We don't necessarily tell them to keep them at a specific distance, just catch it in a good athletic position, what would kind of be similar to you on the field or on the court. We do jerk a fair amount as well. I'll let this video run for those that might be unfamiliar. And we'll use these in different derivatives as well. We don't always use the bar. We use dumbbells. As depends on what we're doing, what sport it is, and where we are in the training cycle. On push press, the athlete will lower the bar themselves. When we get to push jerk and actual jerk, we'll have a spotter on each end of the bar. And so we're mainly asking our athletes to focus on the concentric phase. And then the partners will lower the bar back down, whether it's in the front or on their back. But we're asking them to be able to have a great concentric phase, be able to catch that bar nice and stiff overhead, step feet together if it's a jerk, or stand up tall if it's just a push jerk. And then the partners, once they get to that position, will lower the bar back down. It allows us to do, we don't necessarily say you got to do this load, but with those partners, as they're able to, it allows them that kind of peace of mind knowing that they have a spotter to maybe try something a little bit heavier than what they might be try to do on their own. Again, we're not asking them to push crazy amounts of weight just because. We do it as they're able to do the weight. So we're not overloading them with that. I know a lot of people, especially in throwing sports, will get nervous about doing overhead work. We will utilize some of that within our throwing sports, but again, it goes back to how do we load it. We'll probably use a dumbbell. We may not use the bar. Certain things we'll change it up. But the biggest thing is with the catches. We don't want, or with the initiation of the press on picture 1, elbows have dropped down, knees are coming forward. I'm not really initiating from my hips. So that's what we'll be coaching them up on, is keeping the elbows or keeping the shoulder. If you can, I'm not sure how I would zoom in right now. Here, let's try this. So elbow or the shoulder's not under the bar. So I'm supporting this all in my wrist. So we're trying to get our players to get away from supporting it within their wrist and get it on their shoulders. So push the shoulders forward just a little bit so you give yourself a shelf. Not that the elbows have to be way out in front of you, but the elbows underneath the bar. We drive through the hips, explode up. Now this is on a push press. So we want that push press finish to not, we want it behind the ears, but we don't want our hips forward. We want our hips to be nice and back. And then in picture 3, that would be someone that's not getting their head through on the finish. So they're loading it kind of a way we're not looking for, putting a little extra strain on the shoulders. Picture 2, put a little extra strain on that low back. So we're just looking for, again, going back to the theme of the whole presentation is about biomechanics. Just make sure we're moving correctly. So here would be a correct technique of a jerk. We load through the hips, we drive up and through, we catch it nice and tall through our torso and nice and strong through our base. Same thing with the back jerk. The bar just starts on the back of your neck versus on the front rack. Common technique errors we'll see is in this picture 2. Players will land with their feet too close to each other. And so now we're not loaded through those hips as well as we should be. And a lot of times when their feet are too narrow, the head stays back. So now we're loading our shoulders in a way we don't want to. So just coaching them up, and it's just a constant watch what they're doing, show them how to do it correctly. Try to keep your cues simple so that they don't start to overthink in, analysis or paralysis by analysis. Squat progression. I'll let this video run. So we start with overhead squats. As far as the load on that, if they can handle the bar, we use the bar. We have some other bars that are lighter, about 20 pounds, or we'll use the plates off of the rack. Worst case, we'll use the stick if we absolutely need to. We've just found that with the stick, because of how light it is, it's too easy to not keep where you need it because it's not heavy enough to kind of feel the weight and keep you where you need to be. If it's their first time, we'll have somebody stand behind them, spot the bar, or we'll have a player on each side. A lot of times we'll have 3 people to a rack with our football. Other sports will just be 1 person. So we'll spot overhead, and we're just looking for sinking the hips, sitting through the hips, keeping their posture up as much as possible. If they can't get that low, we just ask them to get to their depth with the spotter, and then the next rep, try to get even lower. And just build up, and over the course of their selves, try to improve. We don't always utilize the goblet squat as the next phase of our progression. It'll depend on what sport it is, and then what our goal is. A lot of times we'll jump right to that front squat. We'll tie that goblet squat in with a lunge, but front squat, we're looking for a nice tall posture. We don't necessarily do Olympic style squat or powerlifter style squats. We just sit through the hips, keep your weight on your whole foot, with a little bit more pushing through that heel than you are pushing through the ball of the foot. Stand nice and tall, whether the bar is on your back or the bar is in the front rack, or if it's overhead. We utilize a lot of single leg, unilateral. I guess this first one is your pistol squat. But coming up here, you'll see I guess the term now is rear foot elevated split squats. We just call it single leg squat. It's a little easier to fit on the paper. But we start again with the same progression. We start overhead squats. Okay, you can't do something overhead if you don't have great posture. So rather than starting with the back squat with bad posture, we're going to start overhead squat, teach that posture, then we bring the rack down to a front rack. Again, have to keep great posture for that to be done correctly. As you finish the front rack, show competence there, then we get into that back rack positioning. And we'll utilize these throughout the year as well. We'll utilize these a lot in season with the different teams. A lot of times that's our 3rd day of a training cycle. Most of our teams do 3 day a week. So our single leg stuff is on that 3rd day. Gives them a little extra time, Saturday, Sunday, to be able to recover before they start the next training week. Just kind of go through. So again, if they can't get to this depth, we at least want this type of posture. Their hips might be up a little higher, but we just keep trying to work them a little bit lower. We do have slant boards that we might utilize depending upon whether they need it or not. If it's an ankle mobility issue, we might utilize it to help them get a little bit lower. But a lot of times just having a spotter, be able to take the weight of the bar and allow you to just kind of work a little bit deeper is typically helped for us. Again, just coaching them up on proper mechanics with this. And we'll see these technique errors. We don't panic on some of this because we'll have a spotter on the bar. If they were doing it by themselves, we definitely would jump in, but we'll have somebody spotting that bar. When a player gets into these type of positions, the spotters will take the weight of the bar, allow the player to kind of get in the position that they need to be in. And then the spotter will just apply enough of the weight of whatever the implement they're using for them to do it correctly. Front squat, very similar. I'm just going to kind of buzz through these. I think people have gone through squat techniques ad nauseum by now. I kind of want to get into the lunges, but again, with all of these, we're coaching up on posture. As far as weight, appropriate loads, but our biggest thing is coaching up on posture, and then load appropriately, and we'll see some benefits. So lunging, this is another one we utilize a lot throughout the entire year. Again, we start with overhead, whether we're stepping in a reverse or stepping forward, we're keeping great posture. A lot of times when we're coaching up on lunge, we're always making them think about sprinting. So trying to pick that foot up into your butt, driving the knee similar to a sprinting stride, and keeping great posture. And with the different steps, it just depends on what we're trying to target. Anytime you're stepping forward, you're using a lot more of your anterior chain. Anytime you're stepping backwards, you're using a little bit more of your posterior chain. So it just depends on where we fall during the year, what we're trying to look for, but it also depends on analysis of the athletes, what we think that they need. This would be the last part of our progression, would be this, we call it a backup lunge or a reverse to forward. What they're doing is they're hopefully accelerating from this reverse lunge into the forward lunge. if we watch the leg, it should come through similar to a sprint stride. And what we're asking them to do, right, is so we've loaded up this front hip. So right now the right leg front hip is loaded similar to driving through a sprint. And then the front leg, as we step all the way back, the front leg switches. Now we got to stop all that load on that left leg. Lateral lunges, talked about using the different lunges to mobilize the hips. We use the bar a lot of times, and a lot of times we'll have a spotter on each end just to help the athlete get where they need to get to, but also be able to take the weight if we need. Because if you fail on a lunge, you fail really, really fast. But we're looking for them to step out and sit the hips back. Let's go back just a little bit. So step, that's a bad step. But once you step, sink those hips, keep the posture nice and tall. With the different sports too, we might utilize a goblet lunge. It'll depend on the load they're using. A lot of times our football players will use the bar. They're just doing more load than what we get to with a dumbbell. This is another big one for us too, as far as mobilizing the hips. Squat down, you pretend like there's a rope strung across and you're trying to squat down, go underneath the rope. It's similar to what we'll use like with a hurdle in a warm-up type setting. Doing some over-unders. We're just putting a little bit of load on our back. We'll also use this in a goblet fashion as well. So we're really big on lunges. Again, great technique is keeping good posture, driving that knee up. The foot's not coming behind me, it's coming underneath, which is what you're trying to do when you're sprinting as well. So we just try to tie everything into being an athlete as much as possible, whether it's overhead, front rack, or back rack. It should all look pretty much identical. Lateral lunge wise, we're stepping, driving that knee up, still very similar. And then as we get into that lower position, this looks like a squat. And that's kind of how we coach them up. Step ups, I'll just let this run through. Just shows you our different progression. If you can't, this is a big one for us. If you guys have any people that have any sort of anterior knee pain, this is a pretty good exercise. It's similar to touchdowns that you might see in a rehab sense for the ACL. We don't put the foot beside the box. We put the foot behind the box. And then when we stand up, so it's about 3 to 5 seconds on the way down. As they come up, we're instructing them to squeeze their glutes and to squeeze that quad. And we've had some good luck, especially as we add dumbbells to the hands, of alleviating some of that anterior knee pain, and not just alleviating it for the short term, but kind of getting rid of it as a whole. As we get into a normal step up, I guess you'd call it, our progression stays very similar to all the rest of the exercises I've showed you. We do overhead. Again, going back to posture, I know I keep harping on that, but that's a big thing that we are coaching up our athletes. So overhead to front rack. And then as far as the actual progression would go, we can go a couple of different ways from the front rack with the forward step. We can go to a lateral, or we can go to a forward, but we're typically when we get to lateral, forward, crossover, those are all going to be back rack. The rest of them are going to be back rack. So once we get to back rack, there's not really a true progression outside of these explosive ones happen as we are trying to peak, whether it's for the start of a season or for the tournament season in the different sports. And with each of these, the load is just whatever the athlete is able to handle with keeping proper form and posture. We typically don't necessarily program based on percentages for step-ups. We might with lunges. It'll just depend on the level of competence that our team demonstrates. So we might end up with an older team that don't really have but 1 or 2 freshmen. Okay, we can maybe put some percentages to it. So here's the explosive. So they're driving through that top leg, trying to get up off the box as high as they can. They're not going to have very much weight on this. It might just be the bar. Or we might do this with dumbbells in their hands, or we might do without any sort of load whatsoever. So we can go from lateral or we can go from forward. But again, it goes back to anything else that we do is intent and posture. And hopefully, if we do that stuff well, that'll carry into where the athletes make their money, which is outside of the weight room. This is all of everything that they're trying to do is help them be better on the field. And that's our main focus as a strength coach as well, is keeping this in mind all the time, is they are an athlete before they're a weightlifter. So tie in as much as we can to their sport, but comes back to posture, body angles. Okay, player in the red has good body angles. This is a nice stiff line from that drive leg. This player in the blue is having a break in that chain, and you're going to see some of the force that they're initiating through their leg dissipate. Okay, so they're not going to generate as much power as the player in the red. So we're trying to coach up. It'd be awesome if all of our athletes look like this person. That's what we're shooting for. We do end up with the player in the blue a lot, and so we see it. We utilize different tools, whether we demonstrate to them, film them, show them how they're maybe moving inefficiently, whatever we kind of need to do to help them attain this red jerseyed player as much as possible. A lot of our focus too is on proper backside mechanics. I don't know, as I think about it right now, I don't know if I have a video on backside mechanics, but difference between front side mechanics, backside mechanics. Right now, this left leg for this player, this is good front side mechanics. They've got a nice knee drive. From here, they can produce a lot of power pushing back down through the ground. The backside mechanic is getting this other leg into that position. So a lot of times people will kick way behind with that foot, and they'll end up with a forward lean as they're running. Okay, we want them to pull that foot up underneath as much as possible. Just by doing that, your knee will automatically drive up into this position. So really, really harping on proper backside mechanics. That pretty well, if you do the backside well, that pretty well solves your front side mechanics. And then as far as striking the ground, we're not striking the ground with a pointed toe. We want to have that dorsiflexion. Make sure the ball of the foot is driving through that ground, pushing down and back. Okay. So you see some real world. Here's a good picture. I guess I do have a picture of the backside mechanics. So this is one of our football receivers, but he's pulling that foot underneath him. He's not pulling it behind him. So that allows him to have better mechanics as he goes through. Looks like I've got some other photos here. So again, he's all contorted from trying to avoid a tackle, but that foot is still pulling up underneath. So by us harping on this during our training sessions, when they finally get into the game, they don't think about it as much. So we got some good arm angles, proper front side mechanic for this player. Here's a softball player, similar thing, not quite getting the extension we want out of that back leg, but front side mechanics are looking pretty solid. So just keep harping on our players, trying to get as much out of it as we can. So hopefully when they get into their sport, they don't think about it and it just happens naturally. Here's a third baseman. Again, still need a little bit extra on that drive, and it could just be when the picture was taken. But for the most part, we could fix these arms a little bit, but we'd be happy with seeing this in a game. Trying to look like Usain Bolt would be awesome for all of them, but we're not too far off. So we could be doing a lot worse. And again, I obviously just picked some of the good pictures. I didn't pick any of our bad pictures. But it kind of shows you our goal is that once they get into the game, they don't think about it. They're able to just go and play fast. As far as plyometrics, I forgot to add the video here. Prancing is essentially a skip. The only difference is instead of a skip, you'll have one foot in contact with the ground and then you switch feet. On a prance, both feet hit at the same time. So what we're trying to exaggerate there is as they drive that knee up on an A skip, they're going to be essentially splitting their knees apart. Okay, galloping is very similar to a dead leg run. We're just, instead of trying to have leg speed on a dead leg run and cover ground fast, we're just asking them to go up in the air higher. Okay, use that non-dead leg to get themselves up in the air as high as they can. A sprinter skip or a fast skip, I really wish I actually had the video tied on this. This is a cool exercise. It really doesn't do me much good to explain it without seeing it in a video, so that's my fault. And then an alternating leg bound. That's just essentially single leg broad jumps, just landing on your opposite leg, almost looking like a triple jumper just throughout 10, 15 yards. We'll utilize a lot with plyometrics because plyometrics are going to be the basis for running mechanics. we have a lot of hills in Dayton, but on our campus we don't have any good hills to use for training. So we utilize our bleachers a lot, doing different sorts of stairs, broad jumps up the stairs, whether we're doing single response, which is a jump and a reset. So it's a max effort jump. That's how we'll start, and we'll use bands for resistance. And then we'll unload by taking those bands off. And so we'll start out with single response, so getting as far as you can each time, reset, really coaching up on posture before we get into multiple response, which is a really, really quick contact time, multiple effort type movement is what we're looking for with multiple response. This is going to be repeat whether we're doing up the stairs or over a certain distance on broad jumps. How fast can we get our legs around in that sprinting mechanic type motion, and how quick can we get off the ground? But we can't get to the multiple response until we've done all of our single response work. And again, we band early, and then as we get through a phase and we get closer to competition or closer to what would be a postseason tournament, then we'll take those bands away. Hopefully they're moving faster by that time. We've had some pretty good success with this. Kind of kicking myself for not putting a video up here. Yeah, oversight on my part. Vertical jumps, we don't have any Vertimaxes. What we use is we'll take the bands, and it might be hard to kind of understand from me just saying it, but you'll take a band and you'll put it across you, 2 bands. So I'll put a band kind of like a sash from my left shoulder down to my right leg, and then a partner will stand on that band, and then I'll do the same thing on my other side. And so I've got 2 people standing on bands, or we could hook them underneath the band attachments on a platform, or we can have really, really heavy dumbbells or plates to hold them down. But essentially they're holding it down, and then I've got bands across me, and I can jump against that like a Vertimax. So that's how we kind of do our vertical jumps. It's the same concept though. We do banded to unbanded, and then single response to multiple response as we go through a training phase. As far as box jumps goes, we'll use those early to help for landing forces, but as we get going, we take those boxes away because we want them to be subject to those landing forces so that they're ready to go for their sport. And then we'll bring the boxes back once they get in season so that we don't have those same landing forces. For our running mechanics progression accelerations, we use bands. Again, we don't have a ton of space to store Vertimaxes or to store sleds, so we use bands and a partner. So a heavy toe is your partner just applying as much resistance as possible. We're only doing this for about 10 yards. To do a good heavy toe, you have to be in this type of posture, okay? And we're looking for as much leg speed as we can in that proper mechanic. It's almost like a moving wall run, so to speak. But partner is behind you, holding that band as tight as they can, resisting as much as they can so that we get a lot of reps in 10 yards. Medium toe, now the partner is going to jog behind, jog to a run. It's more of a top end type work. So the player that's doing the exercise, they will accelerate like normal. The partner's job is to apply a lighter amount of resistance to them, trying to let them get close to their top end speed with adding a little bit of resistance. And then toe and go would be a heavy toe. After they get through a 5 to 10 yard period, then they release the band and they carry out those same mechanics through the rest of the sprint, which might be another 10 to 15 yards. A slingshot is kind of like an overspeed. So rather than the person that's doing the exercise, rather than them starting out with the band in front and pulling their partner, the partner is going to start out and pull the person going. And once they can't hold any farther, they take off and they get that overspeed type effect. We don't utilize this, but maybe the last 2 weeks before season would start. Toe and go would be one that we utilize fairly frequently. Slingshots, it'll again depend on the competence of that particular team. We probably won't use this with a lot of freshmen. This might be more of a senior, junior type exercise. Along with those accelerations, we'll also do different sorts of stairs and hill running as well. This is my last real big point to kind of hit on. We'll utilize these, we call these agility progressions, but we'll utilize these throughout the year in different sorts of warm-up capacity. biggest thing we're looking for here, we talked about it early, trying to mobilize hips. This is going to help that a lot. So first one is a narrow stance, shoulder width apart. We're looking for the athlete to shift their hips. Now that was a bad rep because I kind of tipped, but we want to be able to shift our body towards the cone and just touch. Okay, we don't want to overextend ourselves trying to get there. And so this is the narrow, this is the first one. So we might do 6 touches each side, have them stand up, do some sort of dynamic stretch. Or we can just have them stand up and rest. Then we move the cone out 1 foot. Now this is specific to that athlete. So if they're with a partner, they just kind of reset, or they get with somebody that's the same height as them. This, you can see it a lot better. Okay, the hips shift. Now, I should have taken an angle from behind, but how I'm moving is I'm shifting my hip to that side, getting all my weight loaded. Okay, now from this position, okay, if I was making a cut, you could see that I could drive out of that cut pretty quickly. All right. And that's what we're trying to do. Is it's essentially a long isometric. It's kind of a dynamic isometric, if you will. But we're learning, the athlete's learning kind of their range limits of their own strength and their own body. But we're also kind of, these lines here are 5 yards apart. We're kind of showing them how far they can cover just with their own body without having to move their feet a ton. So our third progression is we add 1 step. Okay, 1 step over, we shift. Okay, it's essentially like a lateral lunge. So we're getting some good hip mobility out of this, but we're keeping good posture. For our sports that are going to defend other players, you know, basketballs, soccer's, this is going to look pretty similar to any sort of defensive stance. Okay, so we're showing them how much they can cover in just small amount of being efficient with their movement. How much can you cover without having to move your feet too much? So forward pivot, backward pivot, we move them out a little bit. Now we pretend our foot is attached to this midpoint with about a 12-inch chain. So we drive into the cone, drive across, into the cone, drive across. As they're coming down and touching, we're looking for good body position. Okay, we're not looking for them getting that foot down and overextending. So once we're here, we're trying not to overextend away from the cone. We want to sink in because we know we're trying to go back the other direction. I will say forward is a lot easier than reverse. Reverse will come up here in a second. So reverse pivot just takes a sec to kind of get used to spinning backwards, but it's going to help you out with any sort of drop step type movement when you get into your sport. And we'll start out with those first 3 pretty much throughout the whole year. And then we'll add in these other pivots, the forward and the backward pivot, as the year kind of goes on. And then the last one's a power cut. So there's just 5 yards. So there's step, 2 steps, 3 steps, however many it takes, but we're looking for good angles as they come down, touch. I'm going pretty slow here. We'd want them to go pretty much full speed. The other thing where we might tweak this is instead of having them go back and forth, we might just have them start here, go into this cone hard, drive out. All right, and that's just used as a warm-up precursor to our agility type movements. So on this next slide, oh, I got some pictures. But you're trying to keep that good mechanics as we go through here. So good posture, shift over with the hips. Okay, shift back, shift over. All right, we're not overextending. Same thing when we get to shoulder width. Shift through the hips, shift back, shift through the hips. And then when we add that step, as I step, I'm trying not to raise up. Now, I rose up too high, but the goal is to not raise up very much. Okay, be very similar to how you start. Okay, step across and then come back and then go the other direction and then come back. When we get into our agility drills, zigzag, all that is it would be a cone, 3 cones in front of you. So it's a forward and back type drill. We're just circling around the cones. We call it, or I'm sorry, I'm thinking of figure 8. Zigzag is, we just honestly will take a gym and we'll just put a random pattern of cones out. And we'll start out with all sprint. But what we're coaching them up on is get in and out of your breaks in as short of steps as possible, about 2 steps to make a cut, and then accelerate in, accelerate out. We're looking for them carrying their speed as far as they can. Don't start slowing down too far away from the cone. Carry that speed all the way into the cone. get good at making full speed cuts. And so we'll utilize that early on. That's not a ton of reps. And then figure eights, that's where I'll use these bullets as an example. You'll sprint down and around and then come back. So this is all in line. And we'll utilize, we're not just sprinting on these. We'll do shuffles, we'll do back pedals. We'll kind of just make up a pattern and really want them to demonstrate good athleticism, being able to move efficiently in and out of the different movements, but also in and out of the different cuts. L drills, T drills, I think we've all run those. It's just, again, similar things. We just change it up. Okay, start with a sprint to the first cone, back pedal back, sprint forward, shuffle. So we just kind of throw different sorts of patterns out there and see how they negotiate those different patterns and then coach them up on it. Our 6-cone agility, so it would look similar to these 3 bullets, just with another 3 bullet cones over to this side, and they would be about 5 yards apart. And so we just have different patterns going around the cones. And then as we get into these reaction agilities, our 1, 2, 3s, that's just 3 cones in front of the player. So if the player was standing here facing these 3 bullets, we'd call out cone 1, cone 2, cone 3. We go 30 on, 1 minute rest. So a 1 to 2 work to rest ratio. And so they sprint forward to whatever number we call, get back. If they can't get back by the time another number gets called, they just shift into that other number, whatever it is. And then a box is virtually the same. We just put them in a box of 4 cones and call out different numbers and have them go to them. And as we're doing that drill, we'll watch how they move, and we just coach them up, try to show them when they're inefficient in their movements, because that's how they're going to lose in their sport. Taking 3 steps or 4 steps to make a cut versus 2 steps. So that's what we're trying to do here. These are also in order for how we would use these agilities as well. The zigzags, it's a little bit longer, a little bit more work capacity. We'll use those early on. Then we'll get into the figure eights, which is very similar. We start to get into the L and T drills. Now we're starting to add in more lateral cuts, lateral movement. And then the 6-cone agilities is pretty much open-ended. And then when we get to the reaction agilities, whether it's the 3 cones in front or a box, those are done really close to competition. So if we're in a summer phase with a football team or with a volleyball team, we would be doing these in the last 4 to 6 weeks before they start camp. Just trying to keep stuff as open-ended as possible, getting them used to playing their sport, which is very much random. So I believe that's all I have. I don't know how the audio went throughout that whole deal, so we might have some questions. We might not. So feel free.
It went, I don't know how it happened, but it had no issues after a while. So that
Awesome.
went finished off great.
Cool.
Yeah, if you got questions, feel free to type them out for Coach here, or if Coach, you can take the questions however you want. If you want them to ask audio, it's up to you. However you want them to do it, that's fine.
Whatever's easiest. Doesn't appear to be too many questions, which I guess the last thing I'd end with would be kind of how we approach stuff. Is it goes back to that KISS principle. We both, my boss and myself, we played football at the University of Dayton. So we don't necessarily approach it from we don't approach strength and conditioning from a weightlifting perspective. We approach it more from the athlete perspective. And so a lot of what we do and what we think we do better than other places would be as it pertains to the running, coaching up our athletes in the efficiencies of their movement. And we have good success connecting to the athletes because we're not trying to make them love weightlifting, right? We get them to understand the necessity of weightlifting, the necessity of doing things correctly, being professional in their approach, but doing that as it pertains to their sport and why it's necessary, how it keeps them healthier, and decreases soft tissue injury likelihood. So that's kind of the biggest thing for us, is just we have a lot of success because of how we kind of approach it more from the athlete standpoint than necessarily from the weightlifting standpoint. Not that there's anything wrong with that, because we lift hard. It's just how we kind of communicate with them is a lot of just trying to keep it in their world a little bit more. We've had some good success with. So if anybody can take that and apply that to their situation, if they're having trouble connecting to their athletes, that's something we've had a lot of success with. So
on your slide, you showed the single response plyometric to the multiple response.
mm-hmm.
How long is that? How long are you in that single response phase? And then when you do have them do single response, how long are they holding that pause for?
So there's actually not a true pause. It's more so so let's use a squat jump as an example. It would be max effort jump, come down, pause. Not pause, just reset versus pausing underneath any sort of resistance. So we do 3 sets of 6 in the band, and then as soon as they finish their 6 in the band, they would come out of the band and do 6 unloaded. And it's just, the pause is just more of a reset. So stick your landing, don't have bad posture in that sense, but jump, land well, reset, do it again. And then that might be, so during the summer, we probably have 12 weeks with like a volleyball team. So that would be, we'll do single response stuff probably for anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks. Once we get in that 3, 4, 5 range, that's when we'll start to kind of sprinkle in some multiple response stuff at the end. So we'll do the squat jumps. We do scissor jumps and split jumps as well. So we might do all 3 of those as single response, and then we'll add in, instead of doing the squat jumps at the beginning, single response, we'll do the scissor jump, the split jump, and then at the end of that session, we're warmed up, we're activated. Now let's do just a couple of sets of the multiple response. So now we're looking at quick contacts on the ground, getting off the ground as quick as we can, getting as high as we can in each of those. And so it might not be a squat jump, but we might do a tuck jump with that. It lends itself to being more multiple response friendly. So as far as like a hard and steadfast transition from single to multiple response, it's kind of played by ear, and it kind of depends on what athletes you have. But this can be done anywhere, about 6 to 8 weeks at a time within that middle. And then the multiple response is also 6 to 8 weeks, but where they would kind of overlap in the middle, we kind of get a combination of both. Does that kind of answer the question?
Yep.
Cool. Kick myself. It would have been a lot easier to kind of see these if I put the videos on here.
It's all right. I've had technical difficulties as well and some things. So we do have a question here. Have you noticed any trends with those athletes that were high school multi-sport versus specialization when they transitioned to college?
So that's a great question. The high school multi-sport athletes typically pick up everything faster, and they get a lot more out of it because they're just overall more coordinated. It depends on what the sports were, but a lot of times, like on a male sports side, you'll have the player that did football, basketball, and then in the spring they either did track or baseball. So then when we asked them to do some of these movements, they picked those up really, really quickly because basketball gave them some of these lateral moving at a random sense. Obviously, basketball is a pretty open-ended game, but they pick up some of these movements quicker and then can utilize them in their sport quicker. A lot of times they're a little more successful. I know football side, our coaching staffs really, really try to recruit multi-sport athletes versus the specializations. Now, a sport that I work with, softball, I'll have some players come in from some smaller towns that have played multi-sports all the way through high school. They are a lot more athletic and dynamic with the movements than the players that have played softball their entire life. And so where that kind of comes into play sport-wise is ball doesn't go exactly where you wanted it or where it should have. It hit off of a batted ball, hits off another player. The players that were multi-sport through high school, they can react to that a lot quicker and more efficiently than the player that's always specialized. And where you'll see that is, and you'll start to, as you see this stuff, get the more trained eye when you're watching sport. Watch when somebody has to make a cut to go back in the direction they came from. Does their whole body kind of sway in where their plant foot is, or are they able to stick in the ground and get back the direction they came from quickly? A lot of times those that can stick their foot and change directions really quick were multi-sport athletes. It's not that the specialization is bad. It's just we've got to expose them to some of those different, I guess, expressions of athleticism. Once they get here, to kind of get them back into more of an athletic realm so that our coaches can do with them what they will.
Awesome. Not seeing any more questions. If anyone else has any questions for Coach, feel free to type them out. Definitely appreciate it, Coach. Thank you very much. And again, glad that this technical issues worked itself out. I would say if there's anything that you guys felt you missed during the beginning when there was a little technical issues, just contact Coach and then see if he could just kind of explain those two slides or whatever it was. But definitely worked out perfectly those last 25 slides or so. I don't even know. So that was awesome. But thank you very much for your time, Coach. Appreciate it very much. Looks like he's putting his contact information in. So if you guys want to reach out to him, feel free.
This is probably the best way to get me is email. This summer's been a little bit weird with all of the COVID stuff, with being in and out of the office. But once we're back in the school year, email is the best way to reach me. So if you have any questions, shoot me a line and I'll get back to you.
Awesome.